Hello all, welcome to Abhiram IAS Academy. Let us go through the daily chronicles of January 22nd, 2025. So today we are going to discuss three major topics, all of which will be important for your mains. Okay, so the first topic is regarding Trump and his controversial and sweeping decisions in multiple areas, okay, regarding the citizenship, regarding the climate agreement, okay, and also trade tariffs, okay. So all these aspects we are going to discuss from numerous articles in the newspapers. So it is relevant for your GS2, international relations, effect of politics and policies of the developed countries on India, and also subtopic change in the global order. Okay. Trump becomes 47th US president to further the conservative policy agenda. Okay. He took numerous decisions regarding immigration, citizenship, pardons and legal reversals, climate and global health, and trade and tariffs, then also other controversial unconventional proposals. Regarding the immigration and citizenship, so what are the decisions he took? The first one is to end the birthright citizenship. Okay, this birthright citizenship was protected by 14th Amendment of US Constitution. Now the US has ended it. So whom does it affect? It will affect the children of undocumented migrants or illegal immigrants and those who are on temporary visas. What about their children? So if they are born in US, will they be granted citizenship? Then he also invoked national emergency to handle the influx of illegal immigrants at the Mexico border. And regarding the pardon and legal reversals, he reversed some decisions of the Biden, around 78 of them, and also granted 1600 pardons for those who are involved in Capitol riots of 2021. Okay, and also some decisions regarding climate, that is Paris deal, he decided to exit, and also he decided to exit the WHO, World Health Organization. So next, trade and tariffs. So if anyone threatens to challenge the dollar's hegemony or US hegemony, they are going to face some tariffs. So he threatened to impose 100% tariff on BRICS nations if they indulge in any kind of non-dollar transactions, and also he didn't even leave the neighborhood, that is Mexico and Canada. So 25% tariff will be imposed on them also, mainly to fight illegal immigrants and also drug trafficking. It will be in effect from February 1st. Okay. Apart from this, he also decided to conduct some trade investigations and reviews of the existing trade, that is, if there is any kind of imbalance or trade deficit, okay, which is not in the interest of US, he will review those agreements, and also he decided to impose supplemental tariffs if he is not satisfied with the trade. So there are some controversial proposals also. For example, he expresses some unconventional proposals, that is, he wants to take over the Panama Canal and also Greenland, and also willing to impose travel bans, okay, and also he decided to de-recognize transgender rights through his presidential orders. Then there is also another phenomena we get to see, that is the rise of tech leadership, okay. It is nothing but developing a tech oligarchy according to some experts, okay. We can see the swearing in ceremony was attended by major tech giants, that is Musk, Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai and Mark Zuckerberg also. So all of them attended, and in fact Elon Musk was made the head of government task force on waste reduction and efficiency, okay. This signals this is actually a de facto oligarchy in fact. So that's what the experts feel. So we are going to look at few aspects among these agreements which are important for us and also for the global level, that is immigration and citizenship, okay, regarding the exit from the Paris deal, and also regarding the trade and tariffs. We are going to focus on these three issues. So the US president has invoked national emergency at the Mexico border to handle the influx of the illegal immigrants. So let us have a look at difference between the India and US regarding the emergency provisions. Okay. So first thing, In India, we have constitutional backing for this. That is, there are elaborate constitutional mechanism and provisions for handling national emergency. There are also different types of emergency. 352 is for national emergency. 356 is for president rule, also called a state emergency, and we have financial emergency under Article 360. So we have constitutional provisions for this. Does US have such constitutional provisions? No, it doesn't. It is basically a statutory backing provision, that is National Emergencies Act 1976. And then what are the grounds for declaration? So we have some specified grounds for declaration for different types of emergency. For national emergency, we have war, external aggression, and also armed rebellion as the grounds. And for state emergency, we need to establish failure of constitutional machinery. And for financial emergency, we need to have financial instability as a ground. So, but US doesn't have any specified grounds. President can invoke as and when the crisis arises to handle multiple crises like disasters, pandemics, economic crisis, even the national security issues. So it is at the discretion of US President. Then what about the parliamentary approval? Yes, we have parliamentary approval and it is mandatory within 1 month. Okay, and also it will last for 6 months and extendable for indefinite period with parliamentary approval. Okay, and in US, Congress has to be notified immediately. That is, when the president decides to invoke national emergency itself, it has to be notified. Congress has to be notified, and also Congress has the power to terminate the emergency. But it might be challenging because it needs joint resolution of both the houses with 2/3 majority, and also because Congress is overriding the president's veto, it needs higher majority. Okay, whereas in India we can override the veto just by simple majority. Here we need 2/3 majority in both the houses. Then duration we have seen 6 months here, whereas it is 1 year here. It can also be renewed annually. Then what is the impact on fundamental rights? So it can impact our fundamental rights. They can be suspended, everything except Article 20 and 21 during national emergency. Whereas in US, it doesn't have any impact on the fundamental rights. All the rights will be intact. Okay, and also the emergency orders must comply with these fundamental rights and also constitutional mandates. So they have extreme safeguards for fundamental rights even during emergency. Then what is the impact on the legislative aspects? In India, Parliament can legislate on the state subjects also if there is a national emergency declaration. But in US, there is no such provision. It is limited to the executive aspects alone. There are no implications for the legislative power distribution. So it does not alter the legislative powers. It is limited to executive actions alone. Okay. Then we have judicial review. In both India and US, judiciary has the power to review the emergency decision. Okay. This is especially after Minerva Mills case in India. And what are the safeguards here? Parliament has the power to approve here, and also judiciary has oversight power. Okay. So what are the safeguards available in US? So both the Congress and judiciary are powerful because of the separation of powers doctrine adhered by the US Constitution. Even its federation is strong. Okay. So that means even the states are powerful. So your legislature, executive and judiciary, all three have important powers and also state, because the amendment, if any, need to be ratified by the states. That is 3/4 of the states need to ratify that. Next, immigration and citizenship policies of US. So 14th Amendment of US grants this birthright citizenship, and it was also established under 1868 case, that is Wong Kim Ark case. Okay, and Trump has given the order that titled Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. So this is the title of the order, and it revokes the birthright citizenship for children of undocumented migrants, temporary visa holders like the H-1B visa holders, not the green card ones, and also student visas and tourist visas. So all of their children, they cannot be regarded as US citizens even if they are born on US soil, which was not the case earlier. So it will apply after 30 days from this order date. Okay, and We have seen constitutional amendment is needed for this, which is highly unlikely, and it is challenging because it needs the approval of Congress and also 3/4 of the states. So the next one is about the crackdown on undocumented migrants or illegal immigrants. So the president order says they have invoked national emergency at the Mexico border. This allows bypassing some legal restrictions. So national emergency has some benefits, like the president or the executive can access some resources funds without prior Congress approval, and also the administrative machinery can be at president's disposal so that he can enforce these orders. Okay, and this will allow the troop deployment which is necessary for the deportation process. Okay, and the order also says it has suspended the asylum applications. If the illegal immigrant wants to continue entering the US and stay there, he has to also apply for asylum. Okay, so this is suspended now. So what should they do? They should remain in Mexico. The asylum seekers or the illegal immigrants, if any, they have to remain in Mexico, and till their cases are adjudicated, they will not be allowed even to apply for asylum. Why all this? So he basically plans to return all the millions of criminal aliens to their homes. That is, deportation of all the illegal immigrants to their home countries. Next, we are going to discuss about Indian immigrants in US and also other illegal immigrants in US. So Indian immigration is basically about skilled migration. Okay, skilled migrants will go to US for jobs. Okay, they can generate income for themselves, and also they will contribute to the US GDP. US is also happy because it can have talent from around the world at a much lower price. So these are the advantages. So it is beneficial both to the US and other countries. So 75% of H1B visas are by Indians. That is in 2023. 3.86 lakh H1B visas are Indians. Next, that means they have critical contribution to the US economy, especially in some sectors like healthcare, education and technology. Also, skilled migration has mutual benefits we have discussed. Then what about the undocumented immigrants then? So undocumented immigrants or the illegal immigrants, they also have some role in the economy because they contribute 5% of US workforce. Okay, so this is all undocumented immigrants, not India alone. So out of this, we have 7.25 lakh undocumented Indians in US. So out of this, we have 7.25 lakh Indians in this category. And in 2024, especially via north, that is through Canada border, 3% of unlawful crossings is by Indians. Okay, and what are the key sectors these undocumented immigrants are working in? Majorly agriculture, hospitality and construction. That is relatively lower skill jobs compared to these. Okay, and India also has recently surpassed Philippines in the largest group of Asian illegal immigrants. Okay, whoever illegal immigrants are there from Asia, we are top. We are top among them. We have even surpassed Philippines. Okay, and 18,000 are already on the final list of deportation from US to India. And in 2023-24, 1.6 lakh people were deported, okay, from India to numerous countries, including India. Around 1100 Indians were also deported in the last financial year. Let us look at the trends of illegal Indian immigrants in US soil. In 2018-19, it was around 8,000. Okay, in 2019-20, it was just 1,227. But from 2020 onwards, these illegal immigrants who have been caught has increased drastically. It was 30,000 in 2020, and 2021 it was 64,000, and in 2022-23 it has almost touched 1 lakh. Okay, what does this mean? Does this mean Indian immigrants are actually suddenly increasing? No, it means the enforcement mechanism has strengthened. Okay, their surveillance has strengthened. That's why more Indian immigrants were caught. Let us have a look at the impact of this illegal immigrant deportation. Okay, so Indians, how does it impact Indians in America? So their H1B visas may be there, but their children's status, what about their citizenship? It is uncertain now because they cannot claim US citizenship by the birthright like earlier, and it also discourages skilled migration. So the skilled workers may actually move away from US and go to other countries like Canada and Australia. That means there may be a change in the immigration trends. We have seen it reduces the skilled migration. So the inflow of the skilled people into US economy also reduces. That means to that extent, their contribution to the US GDP will decline. Okay, and it may also lead to exploitation of the Indians who are working there in the technological companies. Okay, so they may be exploited now, and the enforcement is not easy because it needs lot of funds to enforce. According to one study, it needs $315 billion to $1 trillion US dollars, which is costly. So to that extent, it reduces US GDP also by 4 to 7%. So how does India react to this? So it wants stable relations with US. It doesn't want to strain or anger US. So it adopted a pragmatic approach. Okay, it wants to extend its cooperation in its illegal deportation, but it is worried about the H1B policy changes. Okay, because they will affect the Indians in US. So it wants to negotiate and ensure the H1B policy will not change much. Okay, and it wants to safeguard the rights of Indian immigrants in US. So there may be some strain in relations because of this H1B policy in future. Next, so it wants to work on streamlining the H1B visa, okay, for fair implementation, and also it is advocating balanced policy. Okay, it wants to address illegal immigration problem of US, but also safeguarding the rights of migrants. So that is India's response. Let us look at the initiatives in trade and tariff areas taken by US now. So BRICS, let us have a look at the BRICS. So BRICS share in global trade is 10% earlier. Now it is 23.3%. Okay, and there has been a significant increase in the intra-BRICS trade also. That shows it has high potential to emerge as a separate bloc away from the US domination. So that is seen as a threat by US. Okay, it is seen as a challenge to its hegemony. Okay, that's why it wants to impose some conditions if BRICS nations attempt to have any de-dollarization. What is de-dollarization? So basically moving away from the dollar to other currencies, okay, and having new trade mechanisms. Okay, so they can develop their own BRICS currency. So they were actually exploring the possibility of these, but Trump has said, if you attempt to do this, we will impose 100% tariff on all the BRICS nations. So now India has responded, we have no plans to de-dollarize. Okay, so that was India's response. Then 100% tariff on the BRICS if they attempt to de-dollarize. So de-dollarize, we have seen, it is nothing but diversification of the reserve currencies, moving away from the dollar, and also engaging in new trade agreements or mechanisms and exploring a BRICS currency. So these are the de-dollarization aspects. Why did US do this? Mainly to preserve the dollar hegemony. So anyone who is powerful doesn't want to lose that. So US is doing the same. Next, trade and tariff policies. Canada and Mexico. So even Canada and Mexico bore the brunt of this. So 25% tariff was imposed on them for two major reasons, that is illegal immigration, one aspect, and also to combat the drug trafficking, that is fentanyl's entry. Fentanyl is nothing but a kind of opioid which is 50 to 100 times more powerful than morphine. So there is an agreement between the three nations, that is US, Mexico, Canada. That is US-Mexico-Canada agreement, which has replaced the earlier NAFTA treaty. That is North American Free Trade Agreement was replaced by this in the year 2020. Why? For more economic integration. They want to integrate their economics more. So they have come up with such agreement. But now this imposition of tariff barriers is threatening this agreement. Okay, it might lead to some kind of retaliation by the neighbors also. apart from imposing the tariffs, okay, that is 25% on its neighbors, and also plan to impose 100% on BRICS nations, there are other aspects also like trade investigation and reviews. So if there is any nation with which US has unfair trade balance, that is the trade deficit is persistent, then it wants to review the agreement with such nations, especially China, because it thinks it has unfair currency policies, because China is known for devaluating its currency to boost its exports. So that's why US wants to impose these trade investigations and conducting review of the trade agreements with countries like China. And also it wants to impose supplemental tariff barriers if there are these conditions, that is trade deficit is persistent, and also there is another advantage because these tariffs which are extra might generate some revenue for the government of US. So that is also one advantage cited by this. So it wants to impose supplemental tariffs also. Next, what are the impacts of this? There are some benefits to US in the short term, but also there are some long term effects. Let us have a look at that. So basically US wants to boost its domestic manufacturing sector by imposing this tariff barriers, because it will curtail all the other competitors. Okay, all the foreign competition will be reduced now. So US domestic manufacturing industry can have much simpler terms, okay, free regulations without any competition. So infrastructure funding will also be expected because of the additional supplemental tariff revenue. So these are the positive impacts for US in the short term. Then what are the long term effects? It may harm cross-border supply chains. So what does that mean? So US has the neighbors, that is Canada and Mexico. Their economies are closely integrated because of the agreements like USMCA. Okay, so now they have a stable supply chain which is well integrated across North America. So this may be threatened because of the 25% tariff. And also it will strain the neighborhood relations. The neighbors will not like these tariffs. They may also impose some retaliatory tariffs. Not just the neighbors, other countries also might contemplate about retaliatory tariffs on US. Then this will lead to escalation of the trade wars. So if everyone wants to impose tariff barriers, it will be like prior to WTO, the world prior to WTO. So there were no rules. Any nation can act on its own self-interest and impose barriers on its own. So it can lead to escalation of trade wars, especially with export-oriented countries like China for its manufactured goods and India for services. Okay, and also US consumers themselves might suffer because of reduced competition. The prices of the products might improve, so that will lead to inflation and consumer might suffer there. It also affects the manufacturers because not all manufacturing raw materials might be available in US alone. They may need to import some raw materials. Okay, so they may also be impacted when they rely on the imported goods as raw materials. So it might have negative long-term impacts. What is the impact on India and what is India's response? So what is the impact on India? It affects India's sectors. There are some sectors which are closely linked to US economy because of the trade, especially your textile, pharmaceuticals and IT. Okay, and also there are some positives also because US is planning to improve its fossil fuel production. Okay, so that may actually reduce the crude oil prices. So we may benefit from that. So that is one positive thing. And then what is India's response? What should India's response be? First of all, we have promised we don't have any plans for de-dollarization. Okay, we want stable bilateral relations with US and avoid confrontational policies with US because it will affect our GDP growth. Okay, because our economies are closely linked. And what should India do then? We have to diversify our trade. We need to extend our agreements of trade with other nations. We have to expand partnerships with other countries like European Union, Asian, African nations, all these groupings. We have to expand the trade partnerships and also to improve the domestic resilience in manufacturing. we have to invest in schemes like Make in India, okay, and also probably give boost to MSME because they contribute significantly to the manufacturing sector in India. And also we can diplomatically negotiate for some kind of waivers, exemptions from tariffs. So we can negotiate through diplomatic channels. And meanwhile, we have promised that we will not have any kind of BRICS currency. So we might need to collaborate and have negotiations with the BRICS grouping also, because we have to balance both BRICS and also not antagonize US. So that should be India's response. So the next aspect is US has decided to exit the Paris deal. What is Paris deal? It is mainly to combat the climate change by limiting the rise in the world temperature to below 2 degrees centigrade, even aspiring it to keep it to below 1.5 degrees centigrade. So that is to combat the climate change. And the earlier President Biden's administration has taken numerous policy decisions to further these goals. So that is, Biden has projected US as global leader in climate action with his policies like by 2030, 50% of all the vehicles in US should be e-vehicles, okay, electric vehicles. That is one policy. And another one is about the renewable energy, that is heavy investments in solar farms and also offshore wind projects. So these were the earlier administrative decisions. Now Trump has exited this Paris deal. That means the renewable policies will take a hit, and US has accelerated this exit. So what does this mean, accelerate? So basically, earlier tenure of Trump has also tried to exit Paris deal, but it took long, okay. Almost in the last year of his tenure, he was able to complete the exit process, but now he wants to accelerate it and finish it before 1 year. What are the major aspects under this deal? Pro-fossil fuel agenda. So he wants to increase the production of the fossil fuel without any kind of restrictions. So that will improve the oil production. And his policy is energy independence. He doesn't want any dependence on other nations. He wants to have energy independence for US. So he adopted the strategy drill baby drill. That means you have to drill lot of oil wells, okay, and produce oil. And then this puts US along with other nations which have not signed this Paris deal. So they are out of the Paris deal. Very few nations are there, that is Iran, Libya and Yemen. Now US also joined this league. Next, what are the historical and current emissions by different nations? Let us have a look at them to understand everyone's contribution to the emissions, okay, and we can understand how much they are responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. So historical emissions, if we see, US is responsible for 25% of historical emissions, okay, and next is China. China is responsible for 14% of the global historical emissions. Then Russia. Russia is 7% of historical emissions. Then Germany is 5% and UK is 4%. Even India is also 4% responsible for this historical emissions. Let us have a look at the current emissions then. So current emissions, the top player is China. So China is responsible for 30% of current emissions. Next comes US. US is responsible for 11% of the emissions, that is current emissions. And India comes third in this. So current emissions, we are third, especially because of reliance on coal, okay, thermal energy production. So we contribute 6.8% of the current greenhouse gas emissions. After us comes Russia and then Japan. Russia has 4.5% of current emissions and Japan has 3% of current emissions. Next, so what is the impact of this exit on US economy? So in the short run, there may be some benefits and also some negative consequences. So it will reduce the domestic support for the renewables, okay, your wind and solar investments will decline because the government is not supporting anymore, and also they need lot of investment because they are costly to set up initially. So without government support, they cannot probably grow much. So then there will be job losses in the renewable sector also because the government is pulling out all the investment, and then there may be some short-term growth benefits because production from thermal or hydro is much cheaper compared to this initial setup. Okay, and then but this will be at the expense of long-term environmental sustainability because the emissions are going to increase the global temperatures. It will eventually contribute to the climate change. So we are doing this at the expense of long-term environmental sustainability. Probably it will lead to US isolation, self-imposed isolationism of US, and US may even fall behind in the area of energy innovation. So energy, we are seeing lot of innovation and science and technology, R&D are all happening in this domain, energy. So there may be some break in this innovation, especially the contribution from US in this area might decline. What is the impact of this exit from the Paris deal on a global level? So let us have a look at that. So it will have a significant setback to a fight against the climate change. So US, we have seen, is a major player which is responsible for historical emissions at a global level. So now it wants to back down. That means it is a significant setback to the fight against the climate change. Then it also weakens the collective credibility in the global climate cooperation mechanisms. So that means US has backed down. Other countries might also think, why should we spend on this? We can also back down. So it will weaken the collective credibility. Okay, and also US is a global leader. Now it is backing down. So that will create a vacuum in the global leadership also. So probably China, okay, and also European Union might fill this leadership to some extent. And also developing countries might need to frame new agreements or new alliances with other partners because US is known for innovation and technology. So now it has backed down from the climate deal. That means it is not willing to give any technology transfer to other nations. Okay, so that means it will have a break on the technology transfer related to the energy innovations. So they might need to look other ways. Then UNFCCC, okay, UNFCCC, that might also face challenges in addressing the long-standing North-South tensions. So global North is industrialized, advanced and high-income nation groups. We have US, Russia, all the European nations and also some South Asian nations like Japan and Korea in the global North, whereas the global South is historically, they were colonies, okay. So they were colonies and they are low income and also less industrialized nations compared to the global North, okay. So they have some tensions among them because they want CBDR, that is common but differentiated responsibilities. That is, developing countries want common but differentiated responsibilities in the climate agreements. So the UNFCCC, that is United Nations framework to combat the climate change, might face some challenges in addressing these differences, okay. And also the enforcement will be tough now because everyone can easily back down from their responsibilities. And also climate financing is another major contentious issue because we need $100 billion per annum at least to satisfy the climate financing needs of the developing countries, okay. So these might be challenging now for United Nations Framework Convention. Next article is about Indus Water Treaty. So it is relevant for your GS2, international relations, bilateral mechanisms and India-Pakistan relations. So we are going to look at these two articles from Hindu and Indian Express. So what is Indus Water Treaty? It was established in 1960. Majorly it is a bilateral water sharing agreement between India and Pakistan. And who brokered this agreement? It is World Bank. What are the provisions of this? Basically, it has two broad provisions. One is sharing of the rivers, another is dispute resolution mechanism. Allocation of rivers. So India got the eastern rivers, that is Ravi River, Beas and Satluj, whereas Pakistan got the western Indus rivers, that is Indus, Chenab and Jhelum. So these are the allocation of rivers. And also India has some rights, that is it can use the rivers for energy purposes and also non-consumptive use, okay. for hydropower generation on these western rivers. Okay, so that is Indus, Chenab and Jhelum. So these are the provisions with respect to allocation of rivers. So the other provision is about the dispute resolution mechanism. It is a 3-tier mechanism and the provisions for this are in Article 9 of Indus Water Treaty. So what are the 3 tiers? First is PIC, that is Permanent Indus Commission. This will have all the bilateral discussions or dialogue between the two nations, so they can discuss among themselves. Then we have next tier is neutral expert. Okay, he is a World Bank appointed member and he is an expert in the technical aspects. So he will also adjudicate on this, but this is not a legal adjudication. And then we have next tier, that is Committee of Arbitration. So this is for disputes which may need legal adjudication. Let us understand the dispute about Kishan Ganga and Ratle project between India and Pakistan. So what was the dispute about? Kishan Ganga project is on Jhelum tributary, but Pakistan objects to this because of the flow diversion mechanism and also the dam spillway design. Okay, so if this is a dam, this is your water level reservoir and this is the spillway, which has nothing but it will release the excess water in a controlled manner to the downstream. So that is the spillway. Okay, and the difference between the dam top height and the water level maximum is nothing but your freeboard. So this is called freeboard height. So Pakistan has objections over the spillway design and also the freeboard for Ratle project. So for Kishan Ganga project, it is objecting to the flow diversion and dam spillway design. For Ratle project, it is objecting for the freeboard height. Okay, that is the difference between the dam crest and the water level, and it also objects to the capacity and the design of the spillways. So these are the objections of Pakistan. So what has Pakistan done? So it has objected. So it has to move to first Permanent Indus Commission, that is discuss the issue bilaterally with India, and then it has to go to the neutral expert appointed by the World Bank, and then only it can go to Committee of Arbitration. Okay, that is the last one which will have legal adjudication. Okay, but Pakistan had initially gone to neutral expert, that is in 2015, but before neutral expert can give any kind of adjudication or verdict, it went to demand the Committee of Arbitration. So this means it is bypassing the existing 3-tier mechanism. So because of which Pakistan's legal standing was weakened. Okay, so but India has stuck to the graded mechanism, that is 3-tier mechanism. And what is the neutral expert's decision now? So it has given the decision that India is adhering to the Indus Water Treaty provisions. It is fine, it can continue with the projects, there is no problem, and energy security and water resource management are the objectives for this project. So it has allowed this. Okay, and Pakistan's legal standing has weakened because it wants to bypass this. Okay, we can understand the significance of Indus Water Treaty, and also it is a model template for other conflict resolution mechanisms, especially in the transboundary water sharing agreements. So because even if the tensions are high, that is even if the geopolitical or bilateral tensions are high, India and Pakistan have historically adhered to the treaty provisions and there was no major conflict in this aspect. So it can be regarded as a template for transboundary water management. So why is it so successful? Because a neutral observer is there, that is World Bank is there. So it will have fair adjudication. Okay, it will ensure there is justice because it is not a stakeholder and a neutral observer. So its judgment will be fair, and respecting the sequential mechanisms is critical. That is, you have to go through the 3-tier mechanism. You cannot claim to bypass one mechanism. So the importance of adhering to such mechanism can be understood from this, because Pakistan has not adhered and it is facing the consequence. And also Indus Water Treaty may be upgraded to reflect the contemporary changes. Okay, there are numerous upcoming challenges, that is climate change. Okay, water is getting scarce and also a lot of technological advancements are there. So we can take advantage of this and also update the treaty with such changes. So the relevance of Indus Water Treaty depends on some things, like both the parties have to adhere to the mechanisms and also they should try to cooperate. they should have the ability to maintain some cooperative dialogue. So then Indus Water Treaty can be successful and stay relevant. The next topic is about the ethanol blending program, which is relevant for your GS3 environment and climate change. The subtopic is biofuels. So this is the article appeared in your business standard editorial. So what is this program? Ethanol blending program is mainly to blend ethanol with the fuels like petrol, mainly to reduce India's reliance on the fossil fuels. So to the extent we blend, we are reducing the amount of the fossil fuels. So that is one advantage, that is we can save the foreign exchange reserves to that extent. It will also help in mitigating the carbon emissions because it is comparatively greener compared to the fossil fuels. And it will also enhance the energy security because all the fuel or the biofuels are producing from the raw materials within the country. So it will enhance our energy security also. What is the blending target? By 2025, we should have 20% blending target. So let us have a look at the current status and what are the impacts of this program. So current status, we have reached 14.6% of the blending target and our target is to achieve 20% by 2025 and we want to have more production. So we have already succeeded in this, that is our capacity has more than doubled in the last 4 years. So right now we have 16,230 million liters of ethanol production in the country. So let us look at the economic and environmental impact. We have seen that to the extent of percentage we blend, we are going to save such foreign exchange reserves. Okay, so India has already saved over the last decade 1.1 trillion rupees. Okay, we have saved the forex amount of 1.1 trillion because of this scheme, and it also had positive impact on the environment because it reduced the emissions also. How much did it reduce? It reduced 50 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. So that is also one significant achievement. So it has win-win for everyone. The government also has some incentives to boost the ethanol production. What are they? It has lowered the prices for the rice, which is acting as your raw material for ethanol production. Okay. So it wants to diversify the feedstock. So feedstock is nothing but your raw material, majority of which is just sugarcane. Okay. So we want to diversify it, and maize is also one major feedstock. We want to diversify it. So we have lowered the price for the rice also. Then 40,000 crore investment has been made by government since 2014, mainly to improve the capacity of production and also distillation. So the government has invested 40,000 crore. Okay. Let us understand the challenges because of this raw materials. So we are using sugarcane as a raw material and also maize. Okay. So sugarcane is water intensive and maize we are importing actually from others. So that means our forex is spent up. Okay. So sugarcane is water intensive and it is depleting all the groundwater. So that is one major issue. So that's why we want to diversify the feedstock and move on to the second generation biofuels. So there are different generations, right? First generation is about the food crops. Okay, like your sugarcane, rice, all this. And second generation is about the non-edible crops. Okay, it can be your agricultural residues, municipal waste, all these come under second generation biofuels. Then we also have third generation. So what is third generation? Here we have some algae and some kind of microbes, okay, as biofuel feedstock. And in fourth generation, we have engineered microbes. So they are not natural, they are engineered microbes or engineered algae. So we are still at the first generation biofuels. So government is planning to move on to the second generation. Okay. We have seen it leads to groundwater depletion, especially in Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh and Karnataka. And it has actually breached the sustainable water levels in the aquifers by 20%. So 20% of the basins across India have groundwater depletion. Okay. Especially in Maharashtra, we can see this pronounced. And there are water shortages in the drought prone areas also. And diverting the sugarcane, okay, for ethanol has actually increased the retail prices of the sugar. So we have seen some kind of increase in the sugar prices because we are diverting the sugarcane for ethanol production, and India has also increased its reliance on maize, which is imported, and which means it is spending our forex, and India became net importer of the maize for the first time in some decades, okay, because of this ethanol. Then we have food security trade-off. That means we are actually diverting all the feedstock for production of the ethanol. That means all the food products like sugarcane, maize, rice are diverted for production of ethanol. That means to this extent they will not be available for human consumption. So that's why we call it food security trade-off, and it affected the affordability of maize for consumption, and ethanol production from the food crops is still expensive. Why is it expensive? Not from the technological perspective like in the other generation fuels, but because of our MSP, our government procurement mechanisms. All these are costly because they are assuring some particular price for their crops. So this is costly for the government. So it doesn't make any market sense also. And concerns for long-term environmental sustainability are also there because it is depleting the groundwater resources. So these are the concerns. Next, let us look at the feedstock diversion and water conservation efforts. So we have to diversify the feedstocks away from the sugarcane, maize, rice to other less water intensive crops like your millets, okay, and sorghum, okay, and also sweet potato. So all these are less water intensive, but they can be used as feedstock material for ethanol production. So we have to diversify the feedstocks, and we also have to support the R&D, that is research and development of the second generation biofuels, because we want to move away from the food crops towards the non-edible crops, okay, that is your agricultural residues, municipal waste and other non-edible oils. So we have to move towards these, and the government has to incentivize alternatives like less water intensive crops. We have seen these are less water intensive crops, that is sorghum, sweet potato and also millets. We also have to incentivize the water saving or improve the water use efficiency by incorporating sprinkler and drip irrigation, okay, especially for sugarcane. If we adopt this, we can save lot of water. And we also have to incentivize crop diversification for the farmers and encourage them to switch to these water efficient crops. So these are some initiatives which can have positive impact. Next, there is also another problem. We have seen the supply side problems, that is the raw material feedstock problem. There is also other end of the problem, that is demand side and the industry manufacturing. So there is low adoption of the flex fuel vehicles. So what is this flex fuel vehicles? Basically they have flexible fuels, that is they can run on petrol and also ethanol blended fuels, okay. So there is less adoption of this. So that is one major challenge, and industry is also reluctant because it is costly for manufacturing this, because all the manufacturing tools have to be modified to build these flex fuel vehicles. So flex fuel vehicles runs both on petrol and ethanol. It is rare in India because of these reasons. That is, one is high production cost, so the automakers are not interested, and Indian market is highly price sensitive, we know that. So improving the production cost without any consumers will not be profitable for them. So they want some incentivization, and there is also lack of ethanol distribution infrastructure. So we have huge fuel networks for petrol and diesel, but not for ethanol. So we have to integrate this ethanol distribution also to these networks. So our consumer, that is our citizens, are also unaware of the benefits of this ethanol. And also the industry is slow in aligning with the government goals because of the high transition cost, okay, because we have to retool the manufacturing process. So this is costly, okay. So that is the reason for lower adoption of the flex fuel vehicles. So how can we align the industry with the goals of ethanol blending targets? So we have to give some tax benefits to the automakers, that is whoever manufactures the flex fuel vehicles have to be incentivized with tax breaks, okay. And also we have to impose some mandatory targets, not just the tax benefits, we also have to give some mandatory targets of these flex fuel makers. Then there should be a dedicated ethanol storage infrastructure. We have seen there is a problem with the infrastructure, both storage and also networking. So both these have to be addressed. We have to have dedicated storage facility and also integrate this ethanol's distribution to the petrol and other fuel networks. Then also educate the consumers about the benefits, both economic and environmental benefits, and we can look for some PPPs, that is public private partnerships, to improve the supply chain. Okay, and we can adopt from the model of Brazil. So Brazil has successfully adopted this flex fuel vehicles. It has massive adoption of these vehicles. It even has second generation biofuels and its infrastructure is well developed. So we can learn from Brazil. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to Abhiram IAS Academy.